Greetings and salutations. Welcome to this episode of Playwright Spotlight. Before we begin, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment down below, and share the show with a friend. If you're listening to us on your favorite podcast platform, be sure to leave a 5-star review and subscribe to the channel. My guest today is a New York City-based actor, playwright, and academic. Her dance theater piece, Rescue Me, was produced at the Ohio Theater by Ma Yi in 2010. Her music theater adaptation of Peer Gynt and the Norwegian Hoppa Band premiered in 2017 at the ART NY Theater. She holds degrees from Stanford University, NYU with an MFA in acting, and Columbia with a PhD in theater, English, and comparative literature. She has taught at Columbia, NYU, and MIT, and is currently on the faculty at Purchase College. The world premiere of her play, Drawing Lessons, opens October 8th and runs through November 10th at Children's Theater Company's Cargill Stage. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Michi Barall. If I can hit the right button. We did it.
Thanks so much.
It only took 5 minutes.
It's such a pleasure.
Thank you
so
for doing
much
this.
for having me.
For those of you who've listened in past episodes, my camera keeps overheating, so we had to switch that out. Luckily, it happened before. So fingers crossed it doesn't happen during this conversation. So, well, here I'm just going to start with this because I'm curious. A dance theater piece. Now, is there writing involved with that, or is that just I'm going to tell a story through choreography? And I mean, that's an aspect of that. It's a medium that we've never talked about.
So it is a dance theater piece, but it is also an adaptation of Iphigenia and Taurus.
Okay.
I was interested in the aspect of Greek tragedy that is danced and sung, and I was seeing a lot of European dance theater at the time. I had kind of an academic interest at that time in dance theater. Think Pina Bausch. There was a guy in Belgium whose work I really love named Alain Platel, and I think this combination of kind of movement with text, getting at the emotional core of something, was really interesting to me. And so I started going to see a lot of downtown dance makers. And I found this choreographer whose work I really love, Julian Barnett. I saw him do a solo piece, and the solo piece reminded me, it had this kind of aspect of possession in it, as if he had been possessed by an outside force. And Orestes kind of suffers from spirit possession in some way. And so I asked him if he would choreograph the piece and if he would be in it as Orestes. I sort of knew that who he was as a dancer felt really evocative of the character to me. And he said yes. So this is an argument for just like being the kind of person who greets people backstage or after the show and says, you know, please come do this piece with me. So he agreed to choreograph and to be in the piece. My husband had, I will say, worked with Martha Clark, who's a kind of extraordinary American dance theater maker. And Martha's trick was always to use a cohort of dancers to dance, and then a cohort of actors to do spoken text. We fudged it a little bit so that our dancers were characters who did speak, but I knew that the people who were going to do the bulk of the dancing would have a little less text, and that the actors would do a little less dancing. Although they were, all of them, involved in dance in some form or another.
So is this approached as if it were any other play? Is it written the same way? Or like hypothetically, is the approach is the same as like taking Zoo's story and then just adding dance to it? Are we looking at the same thing? Or when you're writing it, are you keeping in mind a rhythm? Are you keeping in mind a meter or anything like that to where it's gonna go along with the choreography?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly that was one of the impulses that came to me thinking about the tragic theater. And so I think because it is so much driven by meter, which also would have been part of the choreographic, right, patterning of the piece.
Right.
And so could the piece be done just as a piece with no dances? There are dances that are written into the piece, like they dance.
Okay.
So it would be really tricky because the emotional, to do it without it, because the emotional beats are scored through movement. But but it looks like pretty much a play with interruptions.
Sure.
There's a kind of deconstructed framework that happens in the middle of that particular production. There's actually, like, instead of a talk back, there's like a talk back in the middle of the show, where every night we had a Greek scholar who would come and take questions from the take questions from the audience. Some of those questions were planted. We had some that were planned, so that some content could get delivered that we were interested in having be part of the conversation. But there was a totally improvisatory aspect to the Q&A, and it was really up to the scholar and to the dancers who were kind of in charge of running that segment to decide when it was over. It also came with a kind of snack break. I was really interested, and I am really interested in these kind of formal investigations, like testing the boundaries of the theatrical, not so much testing the boundaries of the theatrical form, just expanding them to really make sure that it's all inclusive, right? All aspects of
Right.
the theatrical experience are in some way leveraged. The sonic, the oral, and also the visual. And so for me, I think each piece that I've done has some kind of interdisciplinary aspect to it that is thinking about how do we take the principles of another form and kind of exploit them in a theatrical framework. And that's definitely true of drawing lessons too. So Rescue Me was, again, a kind of adaptation of an ancient Greek play that had a dance focus, a choreographic impulse, and then Peer Gynt was really kind of a rock musical. Peer Gynt, yet another adaptation. This is an original piece that really was prompted by this question: what would it mean to explore live drawing on stage?
Right.
It's something certainly other theater makers have done. And I wanted to see if that was really at the kind of, again, the emotional core of the piece. And the other part of the kind of question of drawing lessons was how, in what ways is a graphic novel like a play, or how is a play like a graphic novel? And what would it mean to put those two genres into conversation with each other? Obviously, like, a play happens in time.
Right.
And so that was one of the kind of challenges of telling a story in time, but also telling it with a graphic interface.
Sure.
I think I've strayed a little from your
No,
question.
no, I do want to get it. I definitely wanted to get into drawing lessons, but I do have one other question when it came to Rescue Me, because I'm assuming there's music involved, or is it just dance without music and just? So
Yeah.
is that was that music composed, or are you taking pieces, composed pieces already in existence and just applying them to Rescue Me?
Yeah.
Or is it a combination of both?
Those were not composed pieces. I'm still really interested in someday doing a piece with. I mean, actually, Peer Gynt was.
Right, sure.
I was thinking of instrumentals, but Peer Gynt was a rock musical in which all of the music was composed by the people who were in the show itself. Sure. But this was really found and popular, a combination of popular music and also some classical. I relied a lot on Andrew Bird.
Okay.
His music, there was something about that, the kind of longing that's in his music that felt really right for this story, which is really kind of a romance. It's a sort of story of a reunion. And so there was something that felt to me right about that sound world. And so we relied on his music a lot, as well as other kind of environmental, atmospheric, sound design.
Okay, all right. And so I'm guessing with your interdisciplinary, that's where drawing lessons kind of came into play. So what was the catalyst of taking a graphic novel approach or a playwriting approach and applying it to graphic novel? Or I don't know which one came first, but
yeah. So the question of Jack, the director of Peer Gynt, and I had so much fun working together, along with these two guys, Matt and Paul, who were both in the show as actors, but also wrote and performed the music. And so we wanted to find a way to keep working together because it felt like such a productive relationship and such a fun process. I think more and more work today is developmental and collaborative, and you want to really like just hang out with your friends and make work.
Right. Sure.
And so I think we were thinking, what would the next piece be? And Jack said, well, I would like to see what live drawing looks like on stage.
Can you define that just so, because I'm not familiar with it, and it's a term
Yeah.
that I'm sure our listeners would kind of be inspired by.
Sure. Yeah. So it really is just watching people draw in real time. And I think,
So are you
what,
using projectors to see what's being on the page onto the?
so yeah, so the conceit always was that we would, and we use different, in development, in workshops, we use different kinds of technologies, but the conceit and certainly the thought in my mind was always that we would have camera over hands.
Yeah, I'm sorry, you would have
Cameras over, like live feed from a camera.
cameras.
That
Okay.
would happen over someone's hands. So
Sure,
you'd
sure,
be
sure.
watching them make the image in real time. And we wondered, like, how long could we sustain that? How interesting would it be to watch somebody draw something? How elaborate could that world be? And so we started with that question. At the same time, I had a sixth grader at home who was obsessed with graphic novels and was bringing one home from the school library at the tune of like once a week. There was like a new graphic novel. And the truth is, I have a very poor visual field. I have, I think, what people call aphantasia, which is like I don't actually see an image in my head. If you say to me, what does an apple look like? Just in your mind's eye, I don't really see an apple. I have a concept of an apple. So
Okay.
for me, actually, reading graphic novels is really difficult because it's so much visual information to process along with text. And I was like struggling to kind of read these books that she was so excited about. And the more I read, one of the things that I think really struck me was that these were books that she would read and then reread and then reread. And I think that's actually very typical of middle grade readers. I mean, it's typical of kids, right? That they'll
Sure.
ask you to read the same story over and over again. But
So
I began.
I'm curious, real quick. I'm sorry to interrupt. Did you know you had this affliction before the graphic novels, or when the graphic novels were brought home, did you all of a sudden, hey, by the way, like, is that what made the discovery?
It's actually been through this process, which has been a 4-year process of researching how visual artists work, what their creative process looks like, what they think about, how they see things, and of listening to a lot of podcasts about brains and how we metabolize sensory information.
Wow.
So I think, yeah, it's a discovery that I made in tandem. It never really, because if you don't have something, you don't know you're missing it. And so
Right, but
something that
even
I
the
kind
example of the apple, you'd think that you would have kind of discovered that a long time ago.
I'm a very verbal person. I
Sure.
guess I think my daughter had said, I remember at one point reading about Temple Grandin.
Mhm.
Temple Grandin is a amazing she's a autistic person who has written an incredible book called Thinking in Pictures, I think. And she designed all these amazing machines. Anyway, she could run a blueprint in her head. She could look at a blueprint and like run what the machine would look like in her head. I remember saying that to my dad, who was an engineer, and he was like, I can do that. And I was like, oh, I think that was the first time when I was growing up when I realized that people could think in pictures and I couldn't. And my daughter has that ability too, to really be able to kind of think in pictures, which I don't have. And so in some ways it's been really, really an exercise in research and kind of thinking with people and discovering kind of how artists talk and write about what they do, visual artists. It's been really, really exciting. I don't feel like I think what's been really important for me is having the partnership with Jack,
Sure.
who is a really avid, has been a reader of comics for 30 years, is deeply in it, is really knowledgeable. I think he was able to kind of throw me a lot of kind of information at the beginning, and then I really had to kind of do my due diligence when I was thinking about comics. And I read Mel Eisner. I just kind of did all the reading around sort of comics history, which is a little bit in the play, also process, right? Really thinking about how different graphic artists do the work that they do. I really wanted people to come away, kids particularly, with the sense that, you know, you have something to say on paper when you draw, and and that line and the liveness of that line is not subject to, you know, being good or not good. It is. And then I also wanted to be able to say that there are skills that you can learn, that there are ways of experiencing the world and thinking about the world, that are practices that anyone can take up if they want to. And so that was something that kind of was really a guiding principle as I was also building the play.
So what was the process? You came to the table, live drawing, and now what are the next steps?
So the process was live drawing and then thinking, these graphic novels are really interesting in terms of how they tell stories visually, in terms of the juxtaposition of text and dialogue with visual information. And so I was really kind of thinking about how would you translate the experience of a graphic novel? How could you put someone inside a graphic novel, an audience member, in time, and kind of tell the story of a protagonist, right? A main character. So a lot of these middle grade comic books were about being in middle school, you know. So I sort of thought, okay, let's find a middle grade protagonist who was actually not good at school. That was something I was really interested also in dramatizing. Is just I felt really strongly about wanting to center an Asian American protagonist who struggled, and who was struggling in a kind of traditional academic context and needs to find a way to express herself outside of that kind of box, right, of the reading and writing kind of box.
Is there a play within a play element going on? Because you've got obviously what's happening on stage, but then you have what's happening on the page as far as the drawing goes. So are there two separate stories?
There aren't two separate. It's all one story. So we've been working since. I mean, I'm going to go back and just kind of maybe lay out how it was developed, and that might help explain it. So it's really a story that is a story of a young girl who is finds a mentor in the neighborhood who is a comic artist, and who finds her voice as a graphic artist over the course of the play, you know, with all kinds of challenges, and also finds her friends and sort of finds who she is through the course of the play. We went from incorporating live drawing. So we watch her draw, we watch him draw. They have kind of two parallel journeys that they're on together as artists. But then we also began to kind of conceive of the world as being one that is much like a graphic novel. So all the locations now are drawn landscapes. So there's a kind of fusion between the set design and the projection design, and the cartoonist that we've been working with, who's a person named Blue Delaquanti, who's been amazing and so much fun to work with. And so Blue is in this moment drawing probably upwards of 100 images, that are images that I propose in the text, as images in some cases of Kate's thoughts. So we actually see either what she's thinking about drawing, or we see what she's seeing, or that we see as part of the location. So for instance, if she's in a classroom, the backdrop of the set is drawn sort of like graphic, as you would see in a graphic novel, representation of a classroom. So they exist in a way, the characters, the actors on stage, inside the envelope of a kind of comic or drawn world.
So is this projected on a scrim then behind the actors?
Yeah, there are a series of screens in effect. And how Jack will mobilize them, how they fit together, there's more than one, is part of, I guess, the design work that's happening now.
So you're saying there's that your cartoonist. Well, I'm sorry. Remind me of his name.
Blue.
Blue.
Yeah,
Okay, so Blue's going through over 100 different images throughout the production, like every night, every
No.
performance.
So all those images are drawn and are fixed images that are part of the play.
Got it.
So
Okay.
those are part of the kind of like graphic interface. And then the live drawing is live drawing. Probably
Got
there
it.
are a total of 5 to 7 moments in the
Okay.
show in which either the character of Kate, who is our lead character, or the character of Paul, who is our comic artist, is drawing, or they're drawing together. There are a couple moments where they draw together. So those moments are, we don't really know how they're going to happen entirely practically because we haven't been in rehearsal yet. But, you know, Blue has in some way drafted those images, and whether or not the actors themselves are tracing or if they're going to learn the images and be able to do them in real time, um, we're still
So you're not
figuring
even in
that out.
you're not even in rehearsals yet.
We're not in rehearsals yet.
Wow.
We did do some in the workshop process. We were able with iPads, and also we spent a lot of time with actors figuring out what they could draw while they were talking,
Right.
and what was compelling to look at on screen as in real time that they were drawing. It was super fun for them, and it was actually really engaging for us to watch them. I think a lot of it was wanting to put the creative process in front of audiences,
Sure.
right? Because often you have, and in many ways we have a completed creative process through Blue's drawings, but we really wanted to foreground to these moments, the 5 to 7 moments in the show, in which you're getting to see somebody make something live.
Wow. How was the casting process for this?
So we had workshops at CTC and in New York City. Those casts look really different because CTC has a special waiver as the oldest Lord theater, children's theater in the country, that enables them to hire children. And so the CTC cast is a cast composed of mostly 14 to 17, 18-year-olds who are playing 12-year-olds plus grown-ups. The New York cast the show has always been built to be doubled if necessary by adults playing the kids and the adults. But in CTC, we really had young people in the room, which was really amazing for us because we were able to get sort of real-time feedback for them, what resonated, what things they cared about, what they wanted to watch, what didn't make sense to them. The play is set in 1995, in part because I wanted to document the kind of rise of the sort of artist that Kate is. So the kind of artist that shows up today making webcomics, like where did they come from? How did they start? Who were their influences? What did they know about? That really was in part, I wanted to think like, how did Raina Telgemeier, who's like a major middle grade, like, you know, bestseller list at Scholastic top seller, I mean, millions and millions with a huge fan base of books. How did she get to be who she is,
Right.
And so what were the cultural and social and aesthetic forces that kind of really gave us this generation of incredibly creative, bold, wonderful graphic artists. So some of the negotiation with the young people who were in the room with us had to do with, them the orientation around 1995, a world without phones, a world in which kids were a little freer, a little more free range. That's been, from a playwriting perspective, really freeing, right? To be able to let a kid kind of have their own independent life without a parent necessarily helicoptering them. But I think, it was really wonderful for us to be able to have a core group of actors who have been with us through many of the workshops. So who came back, some who became unavailable, and so we'd had other actors and they would bring in their perspectives. Because I trained as an actor, I think, and I think of myself really still as an actor, even though I wear that hat less than other hats now. I'm always writing for actors, and I have people in my head that I'm writing for. And in fact, this play, is in many ways a Korean American play because I wrote the character of Matt for my friend Matt Park, who will play the part. And Matt grew up in Minneapolis, and so I was a little bit kind of always imagining or thinking about like not not so much like Matt's own origin story, but like what would Matt want to do on stage?
Right.
What's fun for Matt? What are ways that we can nudge Matt towards like new things? He became a dad, and so I was really interested in kind of, investigating that side of him as it would be an opportunity for him to explore on stage. So for me, the actors who are part of the developmental process are hugely influential and really important.
Are the drawings within the play, are those set, or are they different every time?
So the live drawings, you mean, or the ones that are part of the backdrop? The live drawing. So what they are is set. And how they will happen each day, whether or not there will be a more or less template for what they write, or whether or not there will be latitude for what they do, that's something I think we're going to find out in the rehearsal process.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, Jim, who will be playing the role of Paul, who's the comic artist, he's been with the play for a long time, and he has some drawing skills already, and I think he's been interested in honing them. So I think it really depends on the comfort of the actors, and how much they want to risk and how much time we feel we can give them. And that's going to be part of the exploration of rehearsal.
Right. I mean, did you run into any situations where it's like, man, this kid is so good, he can act so well, but he can't draw? Did you have any of that where it's like, we would have used him, or her, but unfortunately.
There was for rehearsal. So for the auditions, I was actually not in the room. I was on Zoom, and Jack was in the room. And Jack devised. He's a really wonderful deviser. So he devised exercises for the arcades. We sort of knew that Jim could draw already, and he was already cast, so it was easy. But he devised an exercise where they were drawing a Snoopy, basically. And while they were drawing the Snoopy, they were just talking about what they were doing and what they were thinking about, and they were just talking and drawing at the same time. So that was really sort of the audition for the drawing, was could they sustain that? So it had less to do with their drawing skills, because the nice thing too about a comic line is that it doesn't have to be beautiful, or it's not real. It's not like naturalism, right? It's not asking them to make something look realistic in some way. It just had to be that they could really bring themselves to the moment, into the moment, and become immersed in some way in the drawing, and show us that they could draw a line that was their line, that was distinctive as their line.
Wow, that's fascinating. So I'm still trying to imagine how this works on the page, the actual page of the play, and the story that goes behind it, and the images that are being created.
So what it means is that the play is full of italicized stage directions.
It's so full of what?
There are italicized stage directions. There are a crazy number of stage directions. And it will say caption, and then another caption, and then it will say these images appear on screen, these images appear in this order, and then these tableaux happen, and the tableaux are numbered, and these tableaux are like panels, so there are lots of descriptions that can be interpreted by a director in whatever, and design team in whatever way they want to, but all of the visual information is encoded in the actual text itself.
Expand on that.
So well, I guess there are two things. So for instance, all the locations are marked in the text as, we see a map, we see an icon for a schoolhouse. We zoom into that schoolhouse, and then the landscape changes to the hallway. We see the hallway, we hear kids, we hear sounds, all of that is described. And then if there are any captions, those are described. So it's really, all the locations are described, and then beyond that, the drawing is described. They draw a monster, you know.
My apologies, because in my head, I'm thinking it. When you said text, I'm thinking dialogue, which I totally.
Sorry. Yes.
Nope. That's me. Yeah. That's me. I conflated two different things.
Yeah.
Those are not even the same. Got it. Understood.
And the dialogue is just the dialogue. Yeah. The dialogue is just what they say. Yeah.
This has nothing to do with anything, and it's of no import whatsoever, but I'm just curious, how many pages is your play?
It's 92 pages right now.
And
so
what's the runtime?
We don't know. I mean, that's the exciting thing about it. I mean, Jack's feeling is that I'm like, won't it run shorter? Because, you know, a lot of this is described.
Yeah.
And maybe the scene that is like a 3-page scene in the opening is actually only 37 seconds. But he's like, I just think it's going to run as long as that page. Like, I think, that's really what it is. In the beginning, in an earlier draft, we had a lot of interstitial storytelling because I got very excited by the idea. I thought, oh my God, we never have to look at like nothing in a scene change, right? Anytime there's a transition or a scene change, we could be watching panels on screen. And then I realized that I had like completely overstuffed the play with all of this visual storytelling that wasn't necessarily going to be legible, particularly to a younger audience. And so all of that had to go away.
How do you mean?
Well, I mean, so in a like, if let's say you're reading a comic and you see two images, you have to be able to put together the meaning of those images as a story or as a narrative. And a younger audience member without text support or without dialogue and without being able to read may not be able to do that. And it was also asking audiences to shift in and out of reading the comic and reading what was on stage in a way that I actually started to realize like was too much. So that draft is gone. But it was really instructive for me to try to figure out, right, what's the balance between telling stories through pictures versus telling stories through narrative on stage with pictures, which is ultimately where we landed, that the visual world is a support for, in large part, what is happening on stage. But there are moments where the picture itself does tell a story, but those are select moments now.
So the editing process for that after that draft was just getting rid of certain images.
Yeah, so that was, I mean, this draft, I probably think this is like draft 14 since the process started. And some of that is just, finding the right shape of the narrative for these characters, and also writing towards a target audience that is, inclusive. It's a big range, right, to go from a 6 to 12-year-old plus their parents, plus, writing for a kind of multi-generational audience in the way that, say, like a Pixar movie does. And so finding those audiences and making sure we were being respectful of all of them took us some time. And then the truth is, once we were able to onboard the cartoonist, that was like a huge learning curve for me in really understanding like both what we could put on stage in terms of graphic information, but also in terms of like, what is it like to be a cartoonist? There were just practical things that became available to me in conversation with Blue that hadn't really jumped out at me in the research or weren't things that I had read about or seen previously. So Blue's presence really accelerated and intensified the process. You
mentioned a New York perspective from this. What was New York?
So
what was going on in New York?
The Mellon the Mellon grant, which commissioned this play, is a kind of collaboration between CTC and a number of theaters of color, including Michi, which is the theater that I've kind of grown up in New York City. And so Michi and CTC kind of shared some of the work of developing the show through workshops in New York and then in Minneapolis. So I would say there were probably 2 workshops that were full workshops in New York with like day-long readings here and there, and then 2 major workshops that were in Minneapolis. At each juncture, that both theaters were in conversation with me about how the play was developing.
And were Blue's images implemented in those readings?
No. So Blue
Okay.
came. We had a cartoonist do, I think, 2 or 3 days with us in New York City, very, very early on, for us to try to understand this live drawing element. And then this wonderful guy named Josh, whose last name is escaping me, and I have to look it up. And then we worked without a cartoonist until effectively we were greenlit for production. And once we were greenlit for production at CTC, then we started the process of interviewing cartoonists, which was like really just like so much fun.
Where does one find cartoonists?
They were brought to us. I don't know. They were all local artists,
Okay.
so all Minneapolis based. And in fact, MCAD is a Minneapolis College of Art and Design and shares a building or is adjacent to the theater. And Blue teaches at MCAD. So most of our cartoonists came to us either through the theater's knowledge of their work or through MCAD. We did ask a couple people, I think, who are not Minneapolis based, who are not available, who we knew of through the kind of middle grade graphic novel scene. But it's been wonderful to work with Blue. I think also because they are an educator, they have a really great vocabulary for talking to people like me who don't know very much and are learning, yeah.
Okay, so the 4 of you that came to the table with this next idea, you came up with live drawing. So then, which I think is great because you've got 3 people keeping you, kind of holding you accountable, which is awesome. Usually, most collaborations that I've talked to, it's usually like, the playwright and like maybe one other person. So what were the roles of the other people, and how when you're working with that many personalities, how did that go?
So it really actually came down to me and Jack, and when I write the play, when I come to writing the play, I write by myself.
Okay.
So that work is really a process of just kind of being at home with my computer. Once the draft is done, then I'm often kind of asking questions. What do you think about this? What about that character? What could this be? And those are conversations that Jack has been incredibly generous with me throughout. And because he thinks as a deviser and as a director, it's been really helpful. And we've worked together before. Matt really has just been part of the developmental process as an actor. So he's just come to the table and been fun to hang out with. And Paul actually has gone on to do other stuff. He inspired in many ways the character of Paul. So there's like an element of him that's in that. But he's just part of the friend group.
Do you feel that you're at the final draft? Or are there concerns that when you get into rehearsal that there might be some other cuts or that you're gonna have to add or something like that?
There probably will be no. So I have submitted what they called my drop dead deadline draft, at which point they were like, if you give us any more changes, we'll be confused. And because so much of it is design sort of informed or impacts design, it was really necessary for everybody to freeze the script at this juncture. When we go back into rehearsal, there's probably going to be a week or 2 of me doing microcuts of weeding stuff because I haven't heard the draft out loud. And for me, actually, in terms of rhythm and tone and direction, it really, really helps me to hear actors in the room. So probably I'll be looking for ways to whittle the draft from 92 to 85 pages to try to lose some time finding redundancies, just again, like 1,000 tiny cuts here and there.
I'm imagining that the dialogue is determined by the picture that's being drawn.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the dialogue is just scenes of Kate in her life in these various moments along her journey that she takes through the play, with her friends too. Sure. But the dialogue that is built around the live drawing, is all set. I mean, I guess we'll see. We'll see what happens when that happens, whether or not that shifts.
Is it is the dialogue determined by the completion of the drawing, or does it not matter if you know, I imagine that if we're having a conversation as I'm drawing something and all of a sudden the conversation's over, but I'm still drawing, what happens then?
Right. So that's actually where Josh was amazingly helpful to us in coaching our actors in the very first set of workshops, where we focused just on this question. How long does it take to draw a person with a, set of garden shears? How long does that take? Do you know? And how much language do they need? How long can they be silent before we get bored? So all of that actually, in terms of what gets drawn live and how much dialogue there is, was worked out in the workshop process.
Okay.
Yeah.
What did you determine?
I think what we determined is that we had more time than we expected.
Okay.
It is pretty demanding for the actors. It is a little bit that thing of like, you're patting your head and rubbing your stomach at the same time. So it does, but the beauty of, again, something that is not like a still life, but is like a comic, right? Line, is that it wants to be, and we talk about this actually as a principle in the play, it wants to be efficient. It wants to be immediate and direct, and something that isn't pristine or perfect or trying to be exact. It wants to have a kind of emotional charge to it. The kind of drawing that a kid would draw. Do you know what I mean? So it has that energy to it, as opposed to watching someone compose something carefully.
Sure.
As a kind of sequence. Yeah.
You mentioned something about how long can you be silent before the audience gets bored. On that note, does the audience know what's being drawn prior?
No.
So you actually have, some freedom in that regard, because if they are watching, they don't know what the image is going to be, then there's kind of some concentration on trying to figure out what is this image? I can't figure out what this is yet. Well, that's fascinating. Without, that you don't give away what's going to be. Then it was like, I already know what's coming on. I already know what it's going to be.
Right. The thing I think that we are, figuring out that we also really don't know, despite having done all these workshops, is we don't know, because we haven't been able to put the tech in front of an audience. We have no idea what it means for them to read the images in real time. So that's something that we're going to learn. And we may have to make adjustments around.
And maybe this is not a question that you'll know the answer to, but do you have any idea of when the art aspect will be added to the rehearsal process? Or is it, because I imagine you have to be off book before you start adding the elements of I'll call it illustration, but I know that's not really what it is. But,
I think, I don't actually know that Jack would know the answer to this question. I know that the drawing, the actual live drawing, that's from day one. That's on the schedule, so that kids in particular are going to be always working on the drawings, particularly when they're not rehearsing. So we have two at CTC. Leads are always doubled. So when one is not working, the other one will be working on the drawings. Working on the process of drawing, not on a completed drawing that will be part of the thing. In terms of blues drawings for the locations,
I imagine those are already complete.
Those are in process now and will be delivered. I guess they're called assets. I had no idea in the comic world. So the assets are to be delivered, I think, already by the beginning of rehearsal. And they, I imagine, will not show up for us until we're in tech.
Wow. When do rehearsals start?
On the 3rd already. So pretty soon.
All right. Is this a 5-day-a-week rehearsal schedule?
Yes, actually. So it's really wonderful. They have 2 days off. And I think especially because, these kids are amazing. I don't know how they do what they do. I always have that feeling. I'm like, shouldn't you be in bed right now? Because they go to school all day and then they come to rehearsal from 4:30 to 9:30.
Wow.
So they're incredibly dedicated. And I think many of them, except for maybe one, are veterans. They've done umpteen performances of The Grinch. They've done new plays. They've done other. They just really, I think, are, and the theater staff is really amazing, and it provides incredible support for them to do what they do. But they're they're really incredible kids.
This seems like a very complex play to rehearse for maybe 5 weeks. Not including tech.
Yes. So our hope is that that the time that we've had to develop it will show up in some, have dividends when we go into rehearsal. I have a lot of confidence in this group of actors, and also in Jack, who is like both someone who really has incredible vision and is a really galvanizing kind of leader. He also really, and I think something that both of us have really tried to do, is really interested in listening to the actors and really hearing from them, both in terms of their artistic contributions and then also kind of their feeling about what is being said and how it's being said. So
what's the what was the shift for you to go from acting into playwriting?
My husband is a playwright, and I had this idea for Rescue Me. I really wanted to do this adaptation of Iphigenia and Taurus, and I asked him if he would write it with my idea in mind, and he said no. And so I was like, okay, I'll write it myself. And it was a really wonderful lesson.
That's a fine how do you do.
Yeah, it was a wonderful lesson. I think I worked from, weirdly, we were in France at the time, just at this theater festival. And French is like a very dusty language for me. It's like a second language that I learned as a young person in Canada. And so I was reading the text in French and translating it for myself. So I had all of these layers of kind of distance from the text itself that I was kind of working through. But, these old Greek plays, they're such a great lesson in architecture and structure. So I learned so much from just thinking about that play. And also, I think to some extent, I had also gone back to school already. And so a large part of my brain was devoted to thinking about, how does this work? Why does it work? In what ways is it working? What would it mean to reshape it, which is always what we do when we do a new production of something anyway. And so I think that was really kind of the beginning for me of thinking about writing creatively for the stage.
Go back to the Greeks in the structure. What is it about it, and what did you learn structurally?
I mean, they're so efficient, and because there's like unity of time, place, action, which is actually not true of that play mostly. I think also what I learned is, because I was working from a Euripidean tragedy, and Euripides' plays are all over the place in this incredible way. I think, just this kind of lesson of like the stakes of the drama, the force of those characters and their needs, and then also the significance of community. And so even though there
within
are
within the piece or within the actual community?
I mean, within the piece itself.
Okay.
So, obviously, like they're the choruses,
Right.
which were the stars, right, of the Greek drama, more than the actors even. People would come to see the choruses. And so I think for me, and I think this is in this piece too, is that even though we're very clearly following a single character on a very, deeply felt journey through her challenges that she has with the people around her, what is also being told is the story of a community and a village, and how important that village is to her development as an artist and as a person. And so I think that kind of sense of the chorus, as being part of shaping a kind of not just a witnessing, but also a kind of shaping of the character's destiny, was really important to me. Obviously, there are no gods in the same way. Sure. There are some, in a way, in this play, but I think one of the things that I learned from Euripides was both a respect for the form and also his kind of not transgressive, well, he is definitely transgressive. Just a kind of like the nudge against the edge of the form. Like there's always a feeling in Euripidean drama that it's all going to fall apart. Not just like the characters and the world that they live in, but also that the structure of the play is going to fall apart. And so I think that kind of testing is something that I really learned at the same time. Yeah.
But that whole all is going to fall apart. Isn't that where we got the whole, I can never remember how to pronounce it. The Duex,
the Deus Ex Machina who comes in, and fixes everything.
I was thinking there was another one of those fancy phrases.
Yeah, no, it's the God from the machine, right? That comes.
Okay,
and
we do that was a different one.
We do have a little bit of the God from the machine in this play, and it's funny because the kids experience it as Disney. They're like, "This is that Disney moment that happens." But it's it's both a blessing and a curse.
Sure.
It's the sort of challenge of the play as opposed to the resolution of the play. Yeah.
So how much of a background did you have in playwriting when you decided that you were going to tackle that first piece that your husband said no to?
None. I had never written a play before.
What did you learn and what obstacles did you have to overcome?
Oh, except I will say this. Because I was an actor at the time too, primarily, and I had spent luckily, I think in the moment that I came up, there was so much work in the Laureate theaters that was dedicated to new plays and new play development. And also being an Asian American actor, there wasn't a huge archive of Asian American plays at that time. There was an explosion of new plays being written by this kind of third and second wave of Asian American writers. And so I did new play after new play after new play. I was in workshops. I got to listen to dramaturgs talk about the play. I got to listen to playwrights talk about their plays. I was in, plays that would change in week 2 of rehearsal, not week 2 of previews, and had to learn what those changes were. So in a way, by the time I started writing my first play, I had been through the process of development with the text and had a sense of what that meant as an actor. And I had spent so much time with actors. So I sort of had a lot of actors in my head. Yeah.
So you were pretty much being taught, not even knowing it, not even realizing that you were taking playwriting classes. I
think there was a kind of inferential process, right? It's sort of a process by osmosis of metabolizing what it's like to, and then there was the sort of really having to transfer that information and thinking about it explicitly. Sure. What makes a play? Not wanting to sort of just be like, I'm going to make this play that has no rules with it without understanding what the rules were. I really was at the same time thinking what is, through play analysis classes and things like that, what is a play? Which is actually a really big and capacious question. Sure. Yeah.
How did you learn the rules?
So when I think about it, I was at that time, I'd gone to NYU and performance studies for a period of time to think about dance theater, and then I ran out of cash. And I went to Hunter and I did my master's work there. And that was really, I think about Mira Fellner taught this play analysis class. I had really wonderful, I completely lied. I did. This is terrible. Oh gosh. Okay, I wish I had not said what I just said. No. But no, actually, I think Rescue Me maybe it wasn't. I completely lied. I did. I had formal classes. So when I was at Hunter, I studied with Tina Howe. Okay. I took a playwriting class with Tina Howe because you could do that. You could be in the MA program as a MA student and take classes with Tina. And so I actually did, but I'm trying to remember what the timing was on this, if it was before or after or concurrent with Rescue Me. I wrote a terrible Electra for her. And then I wrote an original play for her about transnational surrogacy as my MA thesis. And when I came to Columbia to do my PhD work, I was able to study for 1 year with Kelly Stewart, and she very graciously let me be part of the first year cohort and their classes with her. So she did a lot of kind of like, I think she had studied a little bit with foreignness too. She did a lot of good exercises. I didn't come out of that class with a play, but I did come out of that class sort of having an experience of being with a group of playwrights and being taken through playwriting exercises and kind of nuts and bolts scene work, which I hadn't really had an experience of in the same way in the MA work. Oh my goodness, this is like a evocation of my terrible memory and my inability to remember when things happened. But I remember Rescue Me really as my first play. I think that really is the first play that I wrote, and I think that was in part what brought me to Tina's class, and then also to Kelly Stewart's class when I was at Columbia.
What did the play analysis class consist of?
I mean, that was really like, you know, all the sort of classes that you would, all the classics that Western mostly that you would imagine. Beckett.
I mean, are you breaking down like the structure and like, you know, like here's this moment happens at this point, and then at this point we get to this, and these are the what's the word I want to, you know?
Yeah, just the kind of dramaturgical principles, like, right, how do we think about character? How do we think about story? How do we think about theme? How do we think about setting? So all of these aspects of it, you know, how do we think about language and the use of language in terms of both rhythm and meter and pace, you know, so all of those, I think, you know, I was able to really think both as a practitioner and as a person who was studying like how do plays work. And then when I got to Columbia, I was kind of doing a little bit of work around just dramatic literature as part of my oral fields as well. I was looking mostly at modern Asian drama literature, which is mostly modern Asian playwrights trying to understand how Western dramatic texts work and replicating them in some way within the context of their own social and political worlds as well as their own aesthetic fields. And so that was like, I think, a really important education for me too, is thinking about intercultural work in those terms, even though I'm not in any way a specialist.
Did you guys have to do French scenes?
No, we did not actually.
Pretty good.
I mean, yeah.
I was fascinated by the process when I was first taught them, and I kind of curse them now. Like that was, it seemed like the biggest waste of time.
Oh,
you know, just to sit there and go through. I don't know. We won't go into the French scenes. If you're interested in French scenes, guys, you could go out and research it yourself. I won't put you through the pain. All right, let me go back then. Whether or not you had formal training or not doesn't matter. When you wrote your first play, when you were told no, not to keep bringing that up, just for context of the conversation, what were the obstacles? What did you find that you were like, oh, yeah, I don't know how to do this, or like, what did you find you had to overcome, or what were you learning?
I think the biggest thing was imposter syndrome, right? Was sort of like, who am I to write this play? What am I doing? I'm not a classicist. I don't have the background. I think I grew up in an immigrant family with very few books in the house, and I think I always had a little bit of an inferiority complex. Like, can I access these texts? Like the texts were bigger than me, right? More important, they came from this Western canon that I somehow wasn't entirely like sure how to position myself in relationship to, but I had a big love for these texts, and they really kind of spoke to me. The kind of core themes something that is in Iphigenia and Taurus is the responsibility of this older sister for her brother, who is in some way incapacitated, and because of their whole family history. And my brother is not incapacitated, but he has a developmental disability. And so it really struck me, this kind of relationship between the siblings. And weirdly, I felt like I hadn't really seen it that much in drama literature, the kind of like core meaning, except as you know, like Sam Shepard, like he's like brothers who are at odds. But I felt like I hadn't seen that relationship, and it felt to me that I wanted to translate the love that I had for this text in some way. So balancing feeling like I knew enough and had enough respect for what it was to shift it or tamper with it or interpolate it was a constant sort of like, sense of feeling kind of like a little unmoored and at sea, or unbalanced. So it was a funny balancing act. But I think what really pushed me through it was the feeling that nobody seemed to care very much about Iphigenia and Taurus, so much. So there was that. It wasn't like a play that it wasn't Oedipus, it wasn't like, so it wasn't Hamlet. So it felt somehow manageable. And I think I'm a person who really loves a rabbit hole. And I love a research rabbit hole, which is kind of why I kept going to school. So it really afforded me this opportunity to keep thinking and to keep learning, and to keep coming back to it and trying to find a way to make it communicate better,
What was the moment, or how did you get through the imposter syndrome? What'd you?
I never have. I think you just keep going. I think you just keep doing what you do. I teach a lot of this material now, weirdly, as in my job, which I will start tomorrow. And I guess the other thing, though, is that I understand that the great thing about theater history is that there's always research being done that reshapes our understanding of what has happened. So I think to really understand theater history as a process that is very much alive in each moment, in this moment, like right now, shaped by people who are living with the current political, social movements that exist in this moment. I mean, I think I began to see it less as something that was coming, like that I needed to be an authority about in order to talk about, and more a sort of like conversation that I really like being a part of and that I like sharing.
I want to unpack this theater history thing, because coming from an egotistical actor as I was when I was going through college, that's theater history 1 and theater history 2 were 2 classes that I thought were the biggest waste of time and I didn't need. So now I'm intrigued. I'm willing to hear the argument for it. So,
I mean, it is like, where do we come from? And here are these incredible elemental questions, and here are all of the ways that we can define performance or understand performance, or be in communion with the past in this way. I just think it's like really incredibly exciting. And I mean, it's like any field, right? Any field is always in many ways like preoccupied with itself, right? With the same conversation it's been having for 50 to 100 years, which is why I think people feel like it's dusty and boring and not meaningful. But I do feel like the reality is that how we understand history changes so much. The people we care about in history has changed so much in the time since I've been a student to the time that now I'm actually teaching these classes. I mean, when I was, I took some version. I had actually wonderful, incredible teachers. So I just want to say, I feel like I was the beneficiary of like just extraordinary scholars who really made me feel like I belonged to this conversation and I had something to contribute to it. And I guess I think that's what I I feel like we need everybody. We need everybody in this conversation.
Mm.
I don't worry about theater surviving because I feel like everywhere in every pocket of every
Sure.
country, there are people who want to do this work, right? It's
Right.
like exciting to be together and to make theater alive and put it in front of other people. So I don't feel like, oh God, theater is dying, or like whatever. But I definitely feel like the more we can fling the barn doors open, and make it inclusive and make people see how the history of the theater already includes them.
Right.
I think that really is like part of what's exciting for me about teaching those classes. And every time I teach those classes, I learn so much. I learn so much.
What do you find that you have to teach? What habits do you have to break your students from?
Their phones, their cell phones, their computers. Yeah, I would say the attentional. I mean, actually, a large part of this play is about how precious it is, our attention, and that who we are really is about what we attend to. And like in French, that word attend is attendre. It means like to wait, right? Like there's something about that space of waiting where you can receive something. And I'm not saying it's what I have to say that is important to receive, but I'm just saying like being receptive to what somebody else in your class is saying and how they're saying it,
Sure.
or just like seeing this text, receiving this text and being open to it, and being open also to like the way I think often our impulse is to try to bring stuff close to us, to be like, I just did it when I talked about Iphigenia and Taurus, like, oh, here's a play about a sister and a brother. But the reality is it's also a process of distancing stuff, of being like, these people are really different from us.
Right.
These people in these Greek tragedies, these are not people who share our reality at all, right? And so what does it mean to learn about like cultural and political and social contexts that are vastly different from our own?
Sure.
And what can creatively that do for us, in envisioning a world that might be different from this one, particularly if we feel dissatisfied. So I guess I would say, yeah, like your attention isn't something to give away readily, And I think that's one of the most important values and principles of the theater is it asks us to attend to each moment, right?
Right. What are you teaching?
So this fall, actually, I'm teaching adaptation, and I'm teaching a class on women plus in performance. I teach theater history. I teach modern Asian. Sometimes I teach acting the classics. So last semester we did a production of Midsummer Night's Dream. So we'll take one production, and that will be really a way of studying the world of the play through production choices and through research that the students do and dramaturgy that they bring to bear. It's a kind of deep dive into one text, which I think has been really productive and fun. So yeah, and then that theater histories one. This year I won't teach one, I'll teach two.
Okay.
Theater histories 2, which I have never taught. So that will be a big learning curve for me. Thankfully, that happens after the show opens. So I'll have to put that together.
Well, what do you teach in adaptation? Actually,
so in a way, so often one of the great blessings, and I learned this from one of my professors when I was at NYU, who's a big hero of mine, Karen Shumakawa, is one of the things that you learn is that you can propose classes that will help you with your own work. Oh. So when I was asked to take over the Adapting Literature for Performance class, because one of my colleagues was out that semester, I was like, sure, but can I do children's literature? And they were like, sure, whatever. So because I was writing a play for multi-generational audiences, I wanted to think about what is it like to put plays in front of younger people? What do they care about? How does the storytelling differ, right? What are there different kinds of imperatives? And so I designed this class in which everything on the syllabus is derived from children's literature, whether it's like The Snowy Day by Ezra Jack Keats or Roald Dahl's Matilda, Yeah, so we look at a whole bunch of different texts. So we'll start tomorrow with "I Want My Hat Back," and we'll
Who
so
doesn't?
the students do a combination of like reading actual adaptations and kind of thinking about adaptation and the principles of adaptation, which is something I've like been really interested in, and then they also write their own adaptations.
Have you discovered those principles yet, or is that something you're going to, as you teach the class, you'll learn yourself?
Yeah, no. So we draw on a bunch of different resources. So we draw on Linda Hutchins' book about kind of principles of adaptation. We're looking at theatrical adaptation only, but some students do write because they come from the playwriting and screenwriting department. Some of them may be writing more for television. And so we have a little bit of material that's drawn also for thinking about adapting for other modalities besides theater, or thinking about like sensory theater or like immersive theater. So I don't require them to write just like a play necessarily.
Right. Okay.
And they can adapt fairy tales if they want to beyond anything that's kind of like has a poems as a kind of source in literature is fair game. I did have one student adapt from a video game, which was actually incredibly fun. Video games are incredibly like structured, like
and
highly,
complex.
really, sophisticated engines. So it was really, I think, an interesting experiment for all of us to learn with him how that was informing his playwriting.
Yeah, I don't even know I can't even conceptualize what the writing room, for lack of a better, because I imagine there's a writing room.
Yeah, so
like
we work in writer's workshop. Yeah,
because I mean, I imagine there's the main story, and then I don't know how many other people are going to be doing side quests and stuff like that. But I imagine that there's so many writers involved in a video game.
Yeah,
which I imagine that must have been fun. It must be fun, and it sounds like it was a blast for you guys doing that adaptation. What was it? What was it? I'm just curious.
It was an adaptation of Pikmin. Do you know the video? It's like a Nintendo Switch game called Pikmin.
No.
Yeah.
Pikmin for the stage.
Pikmin for the stage. Yeah, no, it was really charming. So that was fun. And I have to say, I don't know anything about what it's like to be in a video game writer's room, or if they have writers.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I imagine they have to, just like they would in any Hollywood television show or late night or anything like that has writers' room. I can't imagine it'd be any different.
Yeah, there's actually a really, really, really great novel by Gabrielle Zevin, called Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, which actually has the kind of characters who are involved in theater, but also these characters are video game designers, and it's really fascinating and really beautifully written. It's like a novel. Right. So I recommend that novel. But I don't think Zevin.
Isn't that from Lear?
Vin. It's a Scottish play.
Tomorrow. Oh, it is.
Yeah.
Okay. It's okay. We're not in the theater, so I think we can say.
No. You see, I know. I was like ridiculous.
It
right?
is. Like, okay. Oh, that's what it was. It was Howl. Howl was Lear. I think when.
Yes. Yeah.
Howl. Yeah. Is that your biggest influence? Is the classics, the Greeks?
I do love the Greeks. I do, but I feel like a very much a person influenced by contemporary theater worlds too. Yeah. I mean, thinking about drawing lessons, there was the work of William Kentridge that was important for me to think about, and also I really love Simon McBurney's work, Théâtre de Complicité, and kind of the way that he works and the way he uses images was also kind of in the back of my head too.
What do you think American theater is lacking right now?
Money. Federal funding. I think I didn't spend any actual time in Europe beyond summers when my husband and I used to go to the Avignon Festival. Maybe like 4 years in a row we went. And he worked a little bit with Ivo van Hove in Amsterdam. So we spent a tiny amount of time there. But, those were subsidized theaters. And I think when you have subsidized tickets, you get a younger audience. You get an audience that is less concerned about did they have a good time and more like, are they thinking about something in a cool way? Right. There's just like a more adventurous spirit. And I think I think artists have a lot more latitude. I mean, there's the argument that, this system keeps artists on their toes, right? And it keeps us super engaged with audiences because we need them on board with us. We can't afford to alienate an audience or to insult an audience or something in the way that Europeans really can. They have the bandwidth for that, but or the allowance. But I do think that that really investing in arts in schools is hugely important in letting kids from all kinds of backgrounds know that this is a place where they have something to say and can say it. And then also really just on the national level is really funding theater artists and theater criticism and theater like podcasts and all the conversations around theater. Yeah.
But don't you think, because you said it yourself, bandwidth, and you brought up phones, and I just wonder how much people really can stand something that's not a 10-second long clip or anything like that. It's like even movies, they move so quickly now, where if you take something that's, where you hold a shot or I have an appreciation for the classics nowadays as far as like, the older movies, but I'm just not, I don't know.
I don't know. I know that right now in television, there's a whole conversation about building TV shows that are built for dual screen, which means you could be on your phone but still watch the TV show. I guess the beauty of the theater right now, as it exists right now, we don't know what it's going to look like in 10 years even, or 5, but is you have to turn off your phone. And so you do experience time with other people. And I feel like the rarity of that, I want someone to take away my phone for a couple hours.
Take away my phone for a couple months.
Exactly. My daughter went to camp and got to have no phone for 5 weeks. Kind of awesome. Like, I think maybe we'll be wanting these experiences, looking
Well, I
for
hope
them.
that it comes to that and it doesn't become an interactive experience where you use your phones as in the theater and like, we're going to perform it live on stage, but we got a camera that's going to project right into your phone and you can watch it on your small screen right in front of you.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know.
I hope it doesn't come to that.
I hope so too. Because I think at the center of it, right, is the actor. And I think even with all the tech that we have in our show and everything else, at the end of the day, all the tech is there to highlight the actor, who I just think is really the most important person on stage.
Now that drawing lessons is kind of, obviously you've got the rehearsal process. I'm sure you'll be involved in that. What else? What are you working on after this? What's the next project?
I'm actually working on like a TV treatment with a friend of mine, and then I have another collaborator. This piece has been on the shelf for so long. I don't know. I'm hoping to take it off the shelf. There's so in Venice, in the Baroque era, a lot of the music that we kind of think about, like in terms of Vivaldi and stuff, was built in collaboration with young women in these orphanages. And so we're wanting to build, again, like a music theater experience with classical instrumentation, as well as contemporary composition. That kind of highlights the contributions of these women and the sounds. A lot of these women actually were singing contrabass, like they're really incredible voices and voicing. And so it's kind of this, I guess, inquiry into this, again, sort of a Baroque era, like thinking about going back to the past, but thinking about the kind of echoes, right, of compositionally and also vocally for young women today.
Nice. And then finally, where can people find you? Well, not finally, two more questions. Where can people find your work?
That is just in the theater, I guess, at CTC, or we'll be in New York in 2026 drawing lessons. I don't have a website.
And nothing's on New Play Exchange or anything like that?
No, I need to do that. I am a little bit, at some point, I think between the teaching and the everything, I have to join the 21st
Fair enough.
century.
I hear you. Okay. Well, we will include a ticket link in the show notes for drawing lessons since we've got some time.
Excellent.
before that opens. So we'll definitely do that. And then lastly, are you on the socials?
I am not. See, this is
Good for you.
I need to do that too. Yeah, I know. I'm really in that way. I am super old school.
No, that's awesome. Good for you.
Yeah.
I wish I wasn't. It's just kind of a necessity with some of these things, and I'm terrible at it. I haven't been
posting
on this page for a while, and forgive me, everybody. I know should be promoting, especially the people that I interview should be being promoted on my pages, and I'm terrible at it right now. Well, Michi Barall, thank you for coming on to this episode of Playwright Spotlight.
Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you for tuning into this episode of Playwright Spotlight. Again, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment down below, and share this show with a friend. If you're listening to us on your favorite podcast platform, be sure to leave a 5-star review and subscribe to the channel. And in the meantime, and until we see each other again, keep writing.